What happens when a routine interview turns into a tense exchange between Meghan Markle and Piers Morgan? A conversation that should have focused on royal life, public criticism, and personal choices quickly becomes a test of how far an interviewer can push and how far a guest is willing to respond. Piers Morgan is known for asking direct questions, and Meghan Markle has faced years of intense public discussion about her relationship with the royal family and the media. Put those two personalities into the same conversation, and the disagreement becomes difficult to ignore. At first, the questions appear straightforward. But as Piers presses Meghan about her decisions, Harry's relationship with his family, and the criticism surrounding her public image, the answers become increasingly defensive. Piers keeps asking for accountability, while Meghan challenges the assumptions behind his questions. Then the conversation reaches the point where neither side seems willing to step back. What follows is a tense exchange that leaves the audience wondering whether Piers went too far, or whether Meghan's responses made the situation impossible to continue. And by the end, the focus is no longer simply on the original questions. It is on the confrontation itself, and the decision that brings the interview to an abrupt end. The conversation begins with a familiar television interview format. Piers Morgan takes the lead with questions about Meghan Markle's decision to step away from royal duties, her relationship with the media, and the criticism she has received since becoming a member of the royal family. At first, Meghan remains composed and explains that her decisions were based on what she believed was best for herself and her family. She makes it clear that she does not accept many of the assumptions made about her in the press. Piers, however, does not simply move on. He continues asking about the consequences of those decisions and whether Meghan believes she could have handled certain situations differently. That difference in approach quickly becomes the main issue. Meghan wants the conversation to focus on her reasons and experiences, while Piers keeps returning to questions about responsibility and public perception. The discussion also moves toward Prince Harry and his relationship with the royal family. Piers questions whether Meghan believes their decision to leave has affected Harry's connections with his father, brother, and the institution he grew up in. Meghan makes it clear that Harry is responsible for his own decisions. Piers accepts that point but continues asking whether she believes their choices have had consequences for other people. Neither side appears ready to change position. What begins as a discussion about royal life gradually becomes a disagreement about accountability, media coverage, and personal responsibility. And as Piers continues with increasingly direct questions, the conversation starts moving toward the tense exchange that will define the interview. The first major question focuses on Meghan Markle's decision to step away from royal duties. It is one of the subjects that has received the most attention, so Piers Morgan begins by asking whether she ever regretted leaving the royal family. Meghan explains that the decision was not something she viewed as a simple rejection of royal life. From her perspective, she and Harry had reached a point where they wanted greater control over their personal and professional lives. Piers then takes the question further. If the decision was necessary for her, he asks, does she accept that leaving would also have consequences for the royal family and for the public? Meghan responds that she cannot base every major decision in her life on public expectations. She argues that joining the royal family did not mean giving up her right to make choices about her own future. Piers does not dispute that she had the right to make her own decision. Instead, he questions whether personal choice and responsibility can be separated. Leaving, he argues, was a significant decision involving Harry, his family, and an institution that had been part of his life since childhood. Meghan maintains that she and Harry were responsible for their own lives and that remaining in a situation they were unhappy with simply to satisfy public expectations would not have been reasonable. The disagreement is now clear. Meghan sees the departure primarily as a decision about personal freedom, while Piers wants to examine its wider consequences. And that difference sets the tone for everything that follows. The conversation then turns to Meghan Markle's relationship with the media. Piers Morgan points out that she has often criticized press coverage while also appearing in interviews and public projects that attract considerable attention. His question is straightforward. Does Meghan believe there is a difference between wanting privacy and choosing when publicity works in her favor? Meghan rejects the suggestion that she deliberately uses the media when it benefits her. She explains that being a public figure does not mean she should accept every article, photograph, or criticism simply because people are interested in her life. Piers responds that public attention is part of the environment she entered when she became a member of the royal family. He asks whether it is realistic to expect the benefits of public attention while rejecting the scrutiny that comes with it. Meghan says the issue is not publicity itself. According to her, The problem is the way some media organizations report on her and the assumptions made about her character. She argues that there is a difference between responsible reporting and coverage designed to attract attention. Piers continues to question whether she believes she has contributed to the amount of media attention surrounding her. Meghan maintains that she should not be blamed simply because people are interested in her. The exchange remains controlled, but the disagreement is becoming more personal. Piers is looking for an acknowledgement of responsibility, while Meghan believes the question places too much emphasis on her actions and not enough on the behavior of the press. Neither gives ground, and the discussion moves naturally toward an even more sensitive subject: Prince Harry and his relationship with the royal family. The next question focuses on Prince Harry and the changes in his relationship with the royal family since leaving his official duties. Piers Morgan asks whether Meghan believes Harry has become more distant from his father, brother, and other members of the family because of the decisions they made together. He points out that Harry's relationship with the royal family has changed significantly and asks whether Meghan accepts any responsibility for that situation. Meghan immediately rejects the idea that Harry's decisions can be attributed to her. She explains that Harry is an adult who makes his own choices and that their decision to step away was something they discussed together. Piers acknowledges that Harry is responsible for his own decisions, but he continues with a different question. If Meghan knew that leaving the royal family could create serious tension within Harry's family, did she ever consider what those consequences might mean for him? Meghan says they had to consider their own circumstances as well. She argues that staying in a situation they believed was unhealthy simply to maintain family relationships would not have been the right decision. Piers then asks whether she has any regrets about the distance that has developed between Harry and his family. Meghan's answer is firm. She says she cannot take responsibility for relationships between other adults and believes Harry should be allowed to decide what kind of relationship he wants with his family. The disagreement is becoming clearer. Piers is examining the consequences of their decisions, while Meghan continues to emphasize personal responsibility and independence. With that issue unresolved, Piers moves to another area of criticism surrounding Meghan: her public image and the work she has pursued since leaving royal duties. The discussion then moves toward Meghan Markle's work and public image after leaving royal duties. Piers Morgan brings up her media projects, public appearances, and other professional activities and asks whether she believes some critics have a point when they describe these efforts as part of a personal rebranding strategy. Meghan disagrees with that description. She explains that leaving royal duties gave her and Harry the opportunity to build careers around projects they personally wanted to pursue. From her perspective, continuing to work publicly does not mean she is trying to control how people perceive her. Piers asks whether she understands why some people remain skeptical. He points out that many of her projects receive significant publicity and suggests that public criticism is likely to continue when someone with her profile launches new ventures. Meghan responds that criticism has followed her regardless of what she does. She says that when she stays quiet, people question her motives, and when she speaks publicly, those same people accuse her of seeking attention. Piers then challenges that argument. He explains that criticism does not automatically mean prejudice or unfair treatment and asks whether Meghan believes any criticism of her work could be legitimate. Meghan says she is willing to accept criticism, but she does not believe every criticism deserves to be taken seriously. She argues that some commentators have already formed opinions about her and interpret everything she does through that existing view. Piers maintains that public figures cannot expect complete control over how their work is received. The exchange remains focused on their different views of public accountability. Meghan sees her professional choices as an exercise of independence, while Piers continues to question whether public criticism should sometimes be considered rather than dismissed. The conversation now reaches one of its most important questions: accountability. Piers Morgan asks Meghan whether she believes she made any mistakes during her time as a working member of the royal family. He makes it clear that the question is not about blaming her for everything that went wrong, but about whether she can look back and identify decisions she might have handled differently. Meghan says she accepts responsibility for her decision to put her own well-being and her family's needs first. However, she does not agree that she should accept responsibility for every criticism made against her. Piers follows up by asking whether protecting herself and accepting responsibility can exist at the same time. He points out that someone can believe a decision was necessary while still recognizing that the decision may have affected other people. Meghan responds that she understands her choices had consequences, but she believes those consequences have often been presented without the circumstances that led to the decisions. She argues that judging her actions without considering what she experienced gives an incomplete picture. Piers then asks a more direct question. If she could go back and approach certain situations differently, would she? Meghan hesitates before explaining that she would not change her decision to stand up for herself. She says that she has learned from the experience, but learning does not necessarily mean regretting the choices that brought her to this point. Piers accepts that she has the right to see things that way, but he continues to emphasize that public figures are still accountable for the effects of their decisions. At this stage, the disagreement is no longer simply about the royal family. It has become a broader discussion about whether personal freedom and public responsibility can exist together. The discussion becomes more personal when Piers Morgan questions Meghan about the way she responds to criticism. He asks whether she believes some of her answers make it harder for people to understand her position. Instead of focusing only on the subject of the questions, Meghan challenges Piers himself. She suggests that his approach is shaped by his own opinions about her and asks whether he is genuinely looking for answers or simply trying to prove a point. Piers rejects that suggestion. He explains that difficult questions are part of an interview, especially when the subject involves decisions that have received worldwide attention. He says that disagreeing with a question does not mean the question is unfair. Meghan responds that there is a difference between asking difficult questions and repeatedly presenting the same negative assumption in different ways. She argues that she should not be expected to accept a premise simply because it is presented by an interviewer. Piers asks whether she is avoiding the questions by challenging the person asking them. Meghan says she is not avoiding anything. She believes she is defending herself against questions that she considers unfair or based on assumptions she does not accept. The exchange begins to move away from the original subjects. Piers is now questioning Meghan's approach to criticism, while Meghan is questioning Piers' motives for asking the questions. The tone remains controlled, but both sides are becoming less willing to compromise. Piers then makes his position clear. He says his responsibility is to ask questions that viewers want answered, even when the guest does not appreciate them. Meghan maintains that answering questions does not require her to agree with the assumptions behind them. That difference sets up the next stage of the conversation, where the disagreement becomes much harder to keep professional. The conversation becomes noticeably more uncomfortable as Piers Morgan continues asking direct questions and Meghan Markle becomes increasingly critical of the way those questions are framed. Piers returns to the issue of accountability and asks whether Meghan believes she could have handled disagreements with the royal family or the media differently. Meghan responds that she has already explained her position and does not believe repeating the same answer will change the situation. Piers argues that answering a difficult question more than once is part of being a public figure. Meghan disagrees and says she should not have to defend every decision simply because the public remains interested in it. The discussion then turns toward criticism of Meghan's public image. Piers asks whether she believes some people have legitimate reasons for questioning her actions. Meghan says criticism is inevitable, but argues that much of it is based on assumptions rather than facts. Piers pushes back, explaining that not every disagreement with her should automatically be treated as hostility. He asks whether she is willing to consider that some criticism may be reasonable. Meghan says she is willing to listen, but she does not accept criticism simply because it comes from a well-known interviewer. At this point, the interview begins to feel less like a normal discussion. The questions are still focused on public issues, but the responses are increasingly directed at each other. Piers maintains that he is doing his job by challenging the answers. Meghan maintains that she is doing hers by defending her position. Neither appears willing to change approach, and the conversation is moving closer to a point where Piers must decide whether continuing the interview will produce anything useful. The tension reaches a new level when Piers Morgan gives Meghan Markle another opportunity to explain her position. He returns to the question of responsibility and asks whether she can acknowledge that some of her decisions may have contributed to the problems that followed her departure from royal duties. Meghan responds that she has already accepted responsibility for making choices that were right for herself and her family. She does not agree, however, that she should accept responsibility for how every person or institution reacted to those choices. Piers asks whether that means she has no regrets at all. Meghan explains that regret is not the same as recognizing consequences. She says that she can understand why certain decisions created conflict while still believing those decisions were necessary. Piers then challenges her more directly. He says that public figures often have to accept that their actions will be questioned, particularly when those actions affect other people. Meghan responds that she understands public scrutiny, but believes the constant focus on her intentions has become unfair. She questions why every disagreement has to be interpreted as evidence that she did something wrong. Piers insists that he is not asking her to admit that she is wrong. He is asking whether she can consider the possibility that some criticism is justified. That question becomes the central point of the exchange. Meghan says she will consider criticism when it is based on facts, but she refuses to accept what she sees as predetermined judgments about her character. Piers listens, then makes it clear that he believes the interview has reached an important point. They are no longer simply discussing the royal family or the media. They are debating whether either side is willing to acknowledge the other's perspective. The disagreement remains unresolved, and Piers begins to question whether the conversation can continue productively. Piers Morgan now makes it clear that his patience with the exchange is running low. He has asked about Meghan Markle's departure from royal duties, her relationship with the media, Harry's family relationships, and her approach to criticism. Yet he feels that the conversation has moved away from answering those questions. Meghan disagrees. She says she has answered the questions but will not accept the assumptions that she believes are built into them. She maintains that defending herself does not mean she is avoiding accountability. Piers responds that disagreement is completely acceptable, but an interview cannot continue if every challenging question becomes an argument about the interviewer. Meghan tells him that she does not believe she should have to justify her personal decisions to someone who has already expressed strong opinions about her. That response changes the tone of the conversation. Piers explains that his previous opinions do not prevent him from asking questions. His responsibility, he says, is to challenge public figures when there are important issues that viewers want explained. Meghan argues that challenging someone does not automatically make the questions fair. She says there has to be room for her to disagree with the premise of an interview without being accused of avoiding the subject. Piers listens, then tells her that the discussion has reached a point where neither side seems to be getting anywhere. He asks one final question. If she believes his questions are unfair and his approach is biased, why continue the interview? Meghan answers that she came to explain her side, not to agree with everything he says. Piers pauses before responding. At this point, it becomes clear that the interview is no longer moving toward an understanding. Both sides have made their positions clear, and Piers now has to decide whether to continue, or bring the conversation to an end. The conversation reaches its final stage when Piers Morgan decides that continuing the exchange is no longer productive. He tells Meghan Markle that he has given her repeated opportunities to explain her position and respond to criticism. In his view, however, the discussion has increasingly become an argument about the questions themselves rather than the issues they were supposed to address. Meghan disagrees and says she has answered the questions honestly. She argues that she simply refused to accept assumptions she considered unfair. Piers responds that a guest does not have to agree with an interviewer, but the conversation still requires both sides to engage with the questions. Meghan maintains that she has done exactly that. She says she came to speak for herself and will not allow someone else to define her decisions or motives. At that point, Piers makes the decision to end the exchange. He explains that he respects Meghan's right to defend herself, but he does not believe the conversation can continue in a useful way. The disagreement has become too focused on their opposing approaches, and neither side appears willing to move from its position. Meghan remains firm and does not apologize for her responses. Piers then closes the discussion and moves the program forward. The exchange leaves the central questions unresolved. Meghan believes she stood up for herself against unfair assumptions, while Piers believes he was simply doing what an interviewer is supposed to do, asking difficult questions and pressing for clear answers. And that is what makes the confrontation so divisive. Viewers can interpret the same conversation in completely different ways. Some may see Piers as persistent and direct. Others may believe Meghan had every reason to challenge his approach. The final question is left with the audience. Did Piers push too far, or was ending the conversation the right decision? By the end of the exchange, the disagreement is no longer simply about Meghan Markle's decision to leave royal duties. It has become a broader argument about accountability, privacy, public criticism, and the role of an interviewer. Piers Morgan believes difficult questions deserve direct answers, especially when a public figure's decisions have attracted worldwide attention. Meghan, on the other hand, believes that answering questions does not mean accepting the assumptions behind them. That difference is what ultimately brings the conversation to an end. Whether you think Piers was right to keep pressing or Meghan was right to defend her position, one thing is clear: neither side was willing to simply accept the other's argument. So what do you think? Did Piers Morgan go too far, or was he right to draw the line when the conversation stopped being productive? And did Meghan's responses help explain her position, or did they make the disagreement even more difficult? Let us know your opinion in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, Make sure to like the video and subscribe for more stories about high-profile interviews, public disagreements, and moments that continue to generate debate. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.